Before we dive in, guys, I just want to put a quick note here. While this episode covers some of the wild, chaotic, and frankly absurd moments from Andrew Jackson's life, it's important to remember that he was also a deeply flawed and harmful leader. Jackson owned enslaved people and played a direct role in the forced removal of Native American tribes, most infamously through the Indian Removal Act, which led to the Trail of Tears. I believe it's possible to explore history's bizarre and messy side while still being honest about the real harm people cause. So take this as your reminder. Not all wild stories are harmless ones. All right, history nerds, buckle up because today we're diving headfirst into the whiskey soaked, pistol packing, grudge holding fever dream that was Andrew Jackson's life. You think modern politics are wild? Imagine a guy so angry he once got into a duel while already carrying a bullet from a previous duel. This dude was America's original rage monster with a law degree. We're talking about the man who went from teenage POW to backwoods lawyer to president with the most likely to punch you in the face award. We've got war, we've got vendettas, we've got an actual parrot that swore at his funeral. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the Dumbfounded podcast, where I dig up the weirdest, wildest, and straight up dumbest moments in history. Because apparently, stupidity isn't just a modern thing. I'm Thomas Collins, and every month I try to prove that the past was just as ridiculous as the present. So, with that, let's get dumbfounded. Now, Andrew Jackson was born on March 15th, 1767, in the Wexhaws. It's a mild, muddy, pine scented stretch of land that straddles the North and South Carolina border. Nobody could really even agree on what colony he was born in. That's right. From the very beginning, Andrew Jackson refused to be pinned down. He later claimed South Carolina, but that's just because he liked it better. It's kind of like choosing your birth state based on your barbecue preference. His father, also named Andrew, died before he was born. He was crushed by a falling log in a logging accident. So baby Andy enters the world fatherless, angry, and into a war torn frontier. His mother, Elizabeth Hutchinson Jackson, was a strong Scottish Irish immigrant who raised Andrew and his two older brothers with a Bible in one hand and a switch in the other. Young Jackson was scrappy. We're talking feral frontier kid who ran around barefoot, picked fight with the older boys, and somehow managed to be charming while also glaring like he was planning your demise. His education was rustic, but he learned enough to read scripture, write poetry, and yell insults with dramatic flair. Then came the American Revolution. Now, Jackson and his brothers joined up as teenage messengers for the Continental Army. Because, of course, a 13-year-old with unresolved anger issues should absolutely be handed war orders. Captured by the British, Jackson was imprisoned in horrific conditions. At one point, a British officer demanded he polish his boots, and Jackson, the future war goblin that he was, refused, and the officer slashed his face and hand with a saber. This scar would become a lifelong accessory for him. Tragically, both of Jackson's brothers died from disease during the war. His mother later died of cholera while tending to American POWs. By age 15, Jackson was an orphan, scared, alone, dirt poor, and carrying more emotional damage than a daytime soap opera. So, what do you do after losing your entire family and being slashed in the face by the enemy? Well, if you're Andrew Jackson, you hit the books. You become a lawyer, and you immediately start fighting everyone. Jackson studied the law the only way a future dual champion would, informally, under a local attorney while probably yelling about land rights over whiskey. He got his law license at age 20 and immediately moved west to the Tennessee frontier. Back then, Tennessee was the Wild West of the East. No roads, no rules, just moonshine and land disputes. And Jackson thrived. He became a district attorney in Nashville and quickly gained a reputation as a guy you didn't want to mess with. He talked fast, punched faster, and delivered legal arguments like they were bar fights. And Jackson's courtroom theatrics were legendary. He'd slam his fist, yell at jurors, and occasionally threaten people, but he won cases and, more importantly, land. Lots of land. He became wealthy buying and flipping property, building the Hermitage, his eventual plantation, and yes, that wealth came with the brutal reality of slaves. Jackson was a slave owner, not just casually, but enthusiastically. And by the time he died, he owned around 150 enslaved people and was known for punishing escapees harshly. He wasn't just a product of the system, he expanded it. He profited from it. He even bought and sold enslaved people while in the White House. His wealth, his political connections, and even his image as a rugged frontiersman, all of it rested on the backs of enslaved labor. Now, also during this time, Jackson met Rachel Donaldson Robards, who was awkwardly still legally married. They thought her divorce was finalized, but surprise, it wasn't. The resulting scandal stuck to Jackson like gunpowder to a wick. He was livid over the rumors and defended Rachel's honor with the fury of a man who would duel you twice if the first one didn't stick. He didn't just fight over insults, he fought over people trying to take back insult. Jackson treated a duel like it was a Yelp review. And that leads me to my next point. Jackson builds a side hustle out of duels and ends up carrying bullets like they're party favors. Andrew Jackson didn't duel occasionally. He dueled the way most people have coffee, compulsively and with grim determination. The most infamous, Charles Dickinson. In 1806, Dickinson insulted Rachel's virtue in a newspaper article, and Jackson, naturally, challenged him. Dickinson was an expert marksman, and the duel rules were simple: stand, aim, fire. Dickinson shot first, and the bullet shattered Jackson's ribs and lodged dangerously close to his heart. But Jackson, he stayed upright, took his time, aimed carefully, and shot Dickinson dead. He later said his only regret was that he hadn't aimed 2 inches to the left. Doctors couldn't remove the bullet, and it stayed with him, slowly poisoning him for decades. By the time he became president, he had not one, but 2 bullets in him. The man was basically a meat locker for musket balls. He also beat a man with his cane in the U.S. Senate. He brawled in bars, slapped people in court, and once threatened to cut off a man's ears for being disrespectful. This was not a guy who believed in HR departments. Another one worth mentioning was the Waite-Still Avery duel. When Jackson was just 21 years old, he was practicing law in the frontier region, and during a case, Waite-Still Avery, a respected lawyer, insulted Jackson's legal competence in open court, and Jackson saw this as a grave assault on his honor. So Jackson challenged Avery via formal letter, and they arranged a duel at Hayes Ferry. At the signal, both men fired into the air, a move called deloping, used to satisfy honor without killing. Now, it's possible the outcome was prearranged, and duels could end honorably without violence if both sides were willing. This ended up enhancing his reputation, because he had stood up to an established figure. Avery and Jackson reportedly reconciled afterwards. Another one worth talking about was the Benton Brawl. Jackson had a falling out with Thomas Hart Benton, a former ally. The grudge started after Jackson had Jesse Benton, Thomas's brother, arrested for insubordination during a military campaign. The Bentons publicly accused Jackson of abuse of power and challenged his character. So Jackson stormed into the city hotel to confront the Bentons. A gunfight broke out in the hotel lobby, and Jackson was shot in the shoulder and arm by Jesse Benton. The bullet shattered a bone, and severed an artery. Jackson nearly bled to death and only survived thanks to the emergency field surgery using a wooden probe to hold his artery shut. Despite being shot and humiliated, Jackson later forgave the Bentons. Thomas Hart Benton went on to become a staunch political ally during Jackson's presidency. If he were alive today, Jackson would be the uncle who gets banned from Little League games for challenging the umpire to fisticuffs. The man was the embodiment of mess around and find out. And now, the part where Jackson becomes a national hero by winning a battle after the war technically ends. Now, it's 1814, and the War of 1812 is wrapping up. You know, the one where America tried to invade Canada, lost the White House to a fire, and somehow walked away feeling like winners. Britain had decided they were done because they were busy fighting Napoleon in Europe and really didn't have time for America's side quest. So they signed the Treaty of Ghent on December 24th, 1814, officially ending the war. But here's the kicker. There was no emails, there were no TikToks, there were no Insta stories, so the news of the treaty hadn't crossed the Atlantic yet. So enter the British invasion of New Orleans, because what better way to celebrate peace than with one last giant bloodbath? So who's defending New Orleans? Andrew Jackson. Jackson rolls into Louisiana with a ragtag army that includes regular soldiers, Tennessee and Kentucky militia, Creole volunteers, freed slaves, Choctaw warriors, and, oh yeah, pirates. Because Jackson made a deal with Jean Lafayette, the swamp pirate king of the Gulf Coast, who said, "Sure, I'll help you fight the British. Just make sure the government stops trying to hang me." And Jackson said, "Deal, just bring your cannons." So here come the British, led by General Sir Edward Pakenham, a guy who basically thought he was starring in Bridgerton, the military edition. His plan? March straight at Jackson's line of cannons, in redcoats, across an open field, in fog, at dawn. What could go wrong? Meanwhile, Jackson's built a mud-walled death trap outside New Orleans called the Rodriguez Canal. A long trench with ramparts made of dirt, logs, and cotton bales. Behind it, a mix of dudes with rifles and artillery, including those pirates who were uncomfortably good at aiming cannons. Jackson's order? Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes, then turn them red. The British emerge from the fog like they're in a horror movie and walk directly into cannon fire. Within minutes, General Pakenham is shot off his horse, his second in command takes a cannonball to the everything, and the British ranks turn into a meat smoothie. It's not even a battle, it's a field trip into hell. The British suffer over 2,000 casualties, and the Americans, around 70 in total. But remember, the war was already over. The Treaty of Ghent had been signed 2 weeks earlier, but no one told New Orleans. Still, it made Jackson a national hero, and newspapers sang his praises, ballads were written, and he became the original guy who wins fights after the last call. It's like winning a fist fight in a Waffle House parking lot, but, the guy's already gotten in his Uber. So now he's a war hero, so what's next? He gets political. He wins the presidency, and he nearly turns D.C. into a saloon. Plus, he survives the nation's first assassination attempt. Alright, so picture this. It's 1824. Andrew Jackson runs for president and absolutely bodies the competition in the popular vote. He even wins the most electoral votes, but not a majority. And back then, if no one gets a majority, the decision goes to the House of Representatives. And guess what the House says? Nah, we're going to give it to John Quincy Adams, the guy with the least charisma and the most powdered wigs per square inch. Jackson loses his mind. He spends the next 4 years doing what he does best, holding a grudge like it's a family heirloom and campaigning on nothing but rage, vibes, and the promise of political vengeance. Fast forward to 1828, Jackson comes back like a vengeful anime protagonist and steamrolls his way into the White House. His inauguration is an absolute rager. Thousands of his rowdy frontier supporters descend on the White House like it's spring break in Nashville. They mob the furniture, spill punch on the rugs, stand on the chairs like they're at a Kid Rock concert, and the staff couldn't stop them. So they did the only logical thing. They put tubs of whiskey on the front lawn and lured the crowd back outside like drunk raccoons. Now that he's in office, Jackson governs with the subtlety of a jackhammer on a glass coffee table. He kills the national bank because he thinks it's corrupt and un-American. He invents the spoils system, where he gives cushy jobs to his loyalists, basically the 1800s version of thanks for the retweet, here's a government position. And when South Carolina says, hey, we're not going to pay those federal tariffs, Jackson says, try me and I'll send troops and personally hang the guy in charge. The guy in charge? His own vice president, John C. Calhoun, who promptly resigns, probably while packing a go bag and whispering, I do not get paid enough for this. And along with all that, there's the time the guy tries to assassinate him. A deranged house painter named Richard Lawrence walks up to him, pulls a pistol, click, misfire. Pulls a second pistol, click, also misfires. And Jackson? He's 67 years old. Does he run? Does he call for help? Nope. In true Jackson fashion, he just beats the guy with his cane until the crowd at Congress finally pull him off. The guy was like a video game boss. You think you've won, and then he pulls out a second health bar and a melee weapon. But not every chapter of Jackson's presidency is fun stories and chaotic energy, because next, we face the devastating legacy of unchecked power, the Trail of Tears, a brutal policy in what would define one of the darkest moments in American history. Jackson's most lasting and tragic act was the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Despite the Supreme Court ruling in favor of the Cherokee Nation, Jackson ignored it, and famously responding, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Over 60,000 Native Americans were forcibly relocated from their homelands. The Trail of Tears saw over 15,000 Cherokee march west, and more than 4,000 dying from disease, starvation, and exposure. Jackson claimed it was for their protection, but it was really about land, cotton land, profitable land. Land he and his supporters wanted. He framed it as progress, but what he left was death, displacement, and generational trauma, and he remained proud of it. Eventually, Jackson retired to the Hermitage, but he never stopped fighting. He wrote angry letters to his political enemies, criticized the new presidents, and polished his legacy like a rusty rifle. He died on June 8, 1845, surrounded by his family. His final words were allegedly, I have only two regrets. I didn't shoot Henry Clay, and I didn't hang John C. Calhoun. And during the funeral, there was his beloved pet parrot, Pole. Pole had to be removed because he was screaming profanities at the guests. Yes, Jackson's parrot heckled at his funeral. So there you have it. Andrew Jackson. War hero, rage engine, chaos president. A man who built a legend with blood, bullets, and a whole lot of questionable decisions. Sometimes history's messy, but it's never boring. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Dumbfounded podcast, where history proves that being dumb is absolutely timeless. If you laughed, learned something, or just feel slightly smarter by comparison, do me a solid and follow the show. Leave us a review. It really helps history nerds find me. And honestly, I crave the validation. If you have an idea for a show topic, please leave it in the comments. Until next time, guys, stay dumbfounded.